All right, man. We tried this series a couple years ago, the Autopsy of a dead team.
Mm-hmm.
Are we declaring the Giants as dead?
Yes.
They're 2-8. They're 2-8. What is you're always into like the cause of death.
Yeah.
Like what is the cause of death?
Mm-hmm.
And then I'm over there like there's 17 different factors. We gotta consider a lot of things.
Yep.
And you like to get right to the point.
Yeah.
So how?
Well, there's like, a real autopsy has the same thing, right? There's a primary cause of death, and then there's like contributing factors, you know?
And I'm more of like, I like to list all the contributing factors, and you're just like, it's Daniel Jones. So I'm not trying to put words into your mouth, but what would you consider the cause of death here for the Giants?
Yeah, so I was trying to think, it's definitely some form of like 7 deadly sin type of thing, right? I'm trying to work out, is it greed? Did they get too greedy when they tried to keep both Daniel Jones and Saquon in the same offseason? Or was it like hubris, where they got too cocky and thought they were better than they were, and actually we can go crazy instead of, hey, we kind of overachieved this year and then beat the Vikings in the playoffs, and actually we're not that good a team.
It's 2022 hubris.
Okay, yeah.
I have stood by this point that the Brian Daboll's first year as head coach, Joe Shane's first year as general manager, they stepped into a real rebuilding Giant situation and they overachieved unbelievably. They made it to the playoffs. They won a playoff game against the Vikings with Daniel Jones at quarterback. They got the best year of Daniel Jones' career. They had a healthy Saquon Barkley who looked good. They ran the ball effectively. They had Wink Martindale calling plays on the defensive side of the ball, and with his wild blitz schemes. And they won more games than they should have. But if you truly evaluated the 2022 Giants roster, you would, and if you could be honest with yourself, I forget, was it 10 wins, whatever they had, you would look back and say, this is a 5-win team. This is really a 5-win roster. And maybe we found a great coach in Daboll, but we can't treat this as a playoff team that needs to take the next step, or a playoff team that needs to keep the band together and then will grow in year 2. That was a false positive in year 1. So that was the cause of death for 2024 was 2022.
Yeah.
And overachieving that season.
Yeah, that I think is true. So it's just a case of how you characterize that, the approach to that offseason, really. That's what it is. It was that offseason that killed them this year, right? Where the obvious thing to do was to franchise tag Daniel Jones, not tie yourself to him, hedge because you didn't know what it was going to look like going forward. Remember, it's easy now with hindsight to say, well, that was just outright dumb to keep Daniel Jones. There was no way that was going to work. But they had overachieved that year. It was the first year with Brian Daboll, offensive-minded, guru head coach, and they didn't have a great situation. Like the support structure, personnel-wise, around Daniel Jones wasn't great. So I think it was a reasonable thing to say Daniel Jones could and maybe should be better the subsequent year, right? When we get him improved receivers, when we get him improved offensive line, it made logical sense to say Daniel Jones should be better in the future. But it also made logical sense to say you can't bank on that. I mean, it's not necessarily going to happen. You can't guarantee that if we improve the situation around him, he will get better. So the obvious thing to do is to hedge, put a franchise tag on him, and we'll see.
And all that said is, if we're going to have empathy for Colin Cowherd misspeaking, I have empathy for the GM, whose sole purpose is to get a good quarterback, first and foremost. And this is why I say don't just judge the GM by that. I think in the building, after they hedged, they also realized last year, and I was so excited that we did get to see the behind-the-scenes view of Joe Shane and the front office and all the discussions that they were having. If we did not have that behind-the-scenes look, we wouldn't know how adamant he was about trying to trade up in the draft. Like, they realized, now maybe it was a year too late, and look, anytime you're hedging on a quarterback, anytime you're not locking up a quarterback for 5 years at whatever the peak price is, like just happened this offseason with Trevor Lawrence, with Tua, with Jordan Love, anytime you're doing anything below that, you're hedging your bet. Like you're saying, we don't fully believe in you, so chances are it's not going to go well. So they knew, but they didn't have an alternative. The Giants didn't have an alternative, unless they just kept drafting whatever quarterback was available there over the other pieces. So this offseason, they tried to trade up to get Drake May. They tried. Now, you could argue maybe they shouldn't have gotten Malik Neighbors, and they should have drafted J.J. McCarthy or Michael Penix or Bo Nix or whoever your favorite quarterback was. They tried, though. They did try to trade up for Jaden Daniels. They tried to get up there for Drake May, and they couldn't do it. And they're stuck with another year of Daniel Jones, and the hedge obviously didn't work.
Right. But even that, I mean, yeah, anytime you don't have a quarterback, you're in a tough spot, right? So it's not like if they had simply done what we were suggesting and franchise tag Daniel Jones, either let Saquon walk a year earlier or whatever, tried to keep him with a bigger deal. It's not like that would have fixed everything, because you still theoretically would have ended up in the same place of Daniel Jones didn't work out. You would just be a year ahead in terms of trying to fix it, right? So this offseason, they would have gone in a completely different direction. Like, they'd just be a year ahead of the rebuild. Maybe they still would have brought in Malik Neighbors and, gone that route and not achieved the trading up for the quarterback in the draft, or maybe they would have gone even harder to get that guy. But you would be a year further down that road than you are now, which is only coming to the realization this year that, hey, the Daniel Jones thing definitely isn't going to work, right? And we need to go in a completely different direction. So, I mean, that's the thing. It's not a fix. It's not like you do that and everything's great. It's just that you would have been further ahead in fixing it.
I'll tell you what it's not, though. It's not the Saquon Barkley decision. That's not the cause of death here with the Giants. If they had other pieces in place and they let Saquon Barkley walk and they discovered Tyrone Tracy in the draft as they did, I know we just fumbled to lose the game on Sunday, but other than that, we would be saying, wow, amazing, right? I mean, if all the other pieces were in place, if this was the Eagles, right? If the Eagles had walked away from Saquon Barkley and picked up Tyrone Tracy, we'd be carrying Howie off the field. Amazing, Howie. You did it again. You didn't pay the running back, and you did bring in the rookie running back to replace him, who's very effective. If he's not completely Saquon, he's very effective. We would be complimenting that move. That is not the reason why the Giants are 2-8.
No, I actually think they treated the Saquon Barkley thing pretty well, other than the franchise tag part, right? Right away, Joe Shane was making it clear that they had a line that they were not really prepared to go beyond in terms of Saquon's contract, right? I think that's good decision making and good team building, roster construction, roster management is, okay, you're a really talented player, you're incredible, but running backs are simply not worth more than this figure, right? And we're not prepared to go beyond that figure. And that's why, if you want to criticize them, I would criticize wanting to keep him on a franchise tag, as opposed to just simply saying, this is what we're willing to give you for a long-term extension. If you're not willing to do that, we will simply let you go. I think, and that's where it comes back to greed a bit, is that it sort of felt like they didn't want to draw that hard a line in the sand and say, like, they had the principle in place and they kind of backed away from the principle at the last second and went, actually, if we give Daniel Jones the extension, then we can tag Saquon and keep him for a year and we can keep both, right? Whereas really, if you were being super disciplined, that offseason you would have said, we're not keeping Saquon. He doesn't want to sign for this deal. We'll just let him go now and go in a different direction then. If that would be my criticism of the Saquon thing, as opposed to they should have kept him this offseason.
Yeah, and to me that all goes back to, like, we're going to try to build on 2022 success when they're probably a 5 or 6 win team. And if they had been a 5 or 6 win team, they blow it up. They start from scratch. Last question on the Giants here, cause of death being 2022. Are they better off now than they were in 2022? Because I talk about them not being a good roster and overachieving, but if you look at some of the players they had, the Julian Loves of the world and the Leonard Williams of the world, they still had some good solid players, right? They had some just solid players. I use the word solid a lot, but you need a bunch of those in the NFL. Did they have more solid players in 22 than they have now?
I think so. A lot is going to depend on this draft class that they had last year, which looks like it could be an amazing foundation piece to rebuild this franchise from. Like, every single one of those players right now looks like he might be a really keystone piece of this. I mean, Malik Neighbors looks like a superstar when he's healthy. Tyrone Tracy, other than fumbling the game away, looks like a fantastic running back addition for an absolute bargain price. Drew Phillips at cornerback, Theo Johnson at tight end. They're getting contributions from the entire draft class. That could really help rescue them. The only thing is the quarterback. Where are we getting one from? And that's obviously the most important decision that any team needs to make. So, okay, if we're rebuilding this team now, cause of death, hubris from a couple of years ago, right? This has been a death that's been coming for a couple of years. So how do we fix it? The first decision starts to come down to, well, you made this point before, do you judge a GM solely on the quarterback decisions that he makes or does not make? Joe Schoen's biggest problem right now is that a couple of years ago, he made the goof. They gave Daniel Jones a contract instead of franchise tagging him or moving on. That cost them, that set them back. Daniel Jones isn't the guy. He wasn't able to execute a trade for a quarterback in last year's draft. So now they're sitting there with Daniel Jones there and no quarterback.
So I think they might. This draft class does look pretty good, right? You get Neighbors at 6. You have a safety in Tyler Nubin. You've got Tyrone Tracy. I mean, Theo Johnson looks like a player at tight end. It does look like a good draft class. I do feel like they're moving in the right direction. I didn't love Shane's moves the 2 years prior coming into this year.
Right.
So it does look like it's a better – the O-line looks a little bit better. It looks like a better foundation for the next quarterback. Because let's make no mistake, there's a next quarterback coming.
Oh, yeah.
Next year. So whether it's Shadur Sanders or whoever they're going to – I mean, and again, it's a wide open draft class. Is it Cam Ward? Is it – who knows?
Yeah.
But there's a quarterback coming. That's the move. I mean, they're going to draft a quarterback and hope that he's the guy. And I think when you start to look at some of these young pieces in year 2, a lot of these rookies in year 2, it's going to look like a better foundation probably now than it was a couple years ago. And I think Shane deserves at least a touch of credit for that.
Yeah, well, so, I mean, his offseason last year actually looks really good in totality, right? You've got the draft class we talked about. Tyler Nubin was another guy I didn't mention that as part of that draft class looks really good. But also, like, Jermaine Illuminor has been a really good upgrade for not much money for that offensive line. A lot of the moves they made last offseason look really, really good. The year before, it's almost the exact reverse. Like, almost everything they did that offseason was not good, both in terms of the goof we talked about, the Daniel Jones, Saquon Barkley franchise tag dynamic, but also like Deonte Banks being their top draft pick. I mean, he's perennially being benched and then reinserted in the starting lineup right now. That's a pick that hasn't worked out yet. So they're almost like he's had one bad year as a GM across the board and then one good year as a GM across the board. But honestly, it kind of comes down to, does he carry the can for the Daniel Jones mistake? Or do we say, actually, we like the direction this team is moving in overall. Now he's the guy to find the next quarterback.
You also have 2 picks that were chalk picks at the time, 2 years ago, Kayvon Thibodeau and Evan Neal.
Yeah.
And Thibodeau's gotten worse since his rookie season, and Evan Neal has been a train wreck so far, even though he played a little bit better in recent weeks. But
that's another one of those like decisions when you're the owner, right? Evaluating the performance of your personnel guy effectively, right? Does he get blame for essentially doing what everybody would have done if that guy doesn't
They were
work
the
out?
consensus top players. And you might say, oh, don't listen to the consensus. And maybe I'm just giving a pass to everybody right now.
That's what I'm
like,
saying.
Oh, you can't make a decision on quarterbacks. You can't make a decision on players. But, like, again, the guy that had 2 straight good drafts doesn't mean he's going to have the third one.
Right.
The guy who had 2 bad drafts doesn't mean he's going to have a third bad one. What do you do with that information?
Like, on the one hand, he is the guy responsible for drafting good players and not bad players. On the other hand, what you were saying by essentially looking at that consensus is there's nobody you could have put in that job who would have made a different pick, right? That's the problem. So do you fire a guy because he made a couple of picks that haven't worked out, or do you say every single personnel guy I could have had in that role would have made the same picks, so it's not his fault? That's, I think, a difficult question to weigh. I don't know what the answer to that is.
Yeah, so that is like through that lens, I think Joe Schoen, again, I don't know if they were bad picks. Was there something underlying that they should have known about
Right.
Thibodeau and Evan Neal that they shouldn't have taken them, but those looked like fine picks at
Okay,
the time?
so if we're fixing him, if we're fixing the Giants, are we keeping Joe Schoen in the job?
I mean, I would take over.
Well, you're not allowed to take over.
I can't be the GM?
No, in the theoretical world we're dealing with,
I'm giving him and David.
we're ownership, not GMs.
I think I'm giving them one more year.
Okay,
I don't know if that's going to happen,
right.
but I think I'll give them one more year.
Okay, so we're starting our fixing with they got one more year.
Go find the quarterback.
Find the quarterback.
Because look, I think if you look at Daboll's career,
They've got some cap space to play with.
Yeah.
So, they're in the market in free agency. You're probably not finding your quarterback in free agency. You're in the running for the number 1 overall pick. You got that pick. You haven't traded away or anything. So you are going to be in a position to draft the next guy at the top of the draft.
The information is not the picks that they've made. The little we know behind the scenes was that Joe Shane seemingly loved Drake May and his son loved Jaden Daniels. They at least liked the right guys. It doesn't always show in moves. Right. It shows in what you believe. So maybe they'll get the right guy this year. I'll give him one more year.
I mean, I want to keep Joe Shane around just so I can get the input from his son.
His son's right on.
Hey, kid, who do you like at the top of this draft?
His son's probably a big Commanders fan now.
Yeah. Okay, so yeah, they are going to get to draft the next guy. I mean, that's ultimately the key, right? They got a first-round pick. That might be the number one overall pick by the time all is said and done. Regardless, it's going to be a pick high enough to get you the next quarterback. Everything hinges on getting that right.
I know Brian Burns is playing well this year. He's fine. I think that's a lot of money for Brian Burns, where they're going to need more help elsewhere. They need corner help. They need pass rush help next to Dexter Lawrence on the interior. Still probably need even more offensive line depth to make sure that thing doesn't get worse, and then another complementary piece to Malik Neighbors.
Yeah, I think they still need to keep throwing bodies at that offensive line as well. Evan Neal didn't play badly. The most recent game he had to start, he's looked terrible
It's early.
Right, every other game of his career pretty much. So that's an area you probably want to look at. If they're in the offensive line market, and free agency is a place, I think, to achieve that. It's not a great looking draft, or not a great looking class in terms of tackles, So if you are looking for that right tackle, or the left tackle, I guess, and if you are looking for an extra tackle, Andrew Thomas is there, Illuminor, solid enough. Do you want to upgrade that, or do you want to look back in the interior? Our guy Brad Spielberger, who's obviously looked ahead to our previous colleague, current friend.
Rest in peace.
Rest in peace. Has looked at the free agent class and is like, you thought the last couple were rough. The upcoming one looks really rough. So might not be a great class to find, high-end starters, but
solid.
Bring in bodies.
Solid.
Keep bringing in bodies.
They need more solid. O-line, back seven, need more solid. Every pass rusher, need more solid everywhere else. All right. We good with the Giants? We fixed them a little bit. It's mostly a cause of death discussion, though.
Yeah. I mean,
we'll fix them in 5 minutes this offseason,
right.
as we always
We got to give them some kind of pathway to succeeding. Look, I think obviously cause of death we've identified. I think the pathway to fixing them is give Joe Shane one last chance. And this is the QB you tie him to, right? Go identify your guy, find me the future, and then the rest of the offseason is effectively making sure that guy has the platform to succeed, right? Malik Neighbors was a great step in the right direction. Illuminor, like the little bits and pieces they've added, good steps in the right direction, but let's solidify that. Let's make sure that Cam Ward or Shadur Sanders or whoever it's going to be, we're not looking at this in June and saying this rookie's going to get his ass kicked because the situation around him is so bad.
And turn those they have 8 draft picks right now. Turn 8 into 12. Always my answer.
Right.
Turn 8 into 12. Add more depth to this roster.
Thanks for watching all the way to the end of our video.
For more great content, click here to subscribe and here to watch another video. We'll see you again soon.